I think Craig has just sorted out his dog, and then he will put his camera on and help us. And yeah, they make life very interesting and fun. So again, for the audience, we are talking about webinar 8, the South African regulatory environment for gas projects. What works, what doesn't work, what can we do? Our 3 presenters again: Anton Pitter, an OTC partner and consultant; Beresford Peterson, the founder of Bastion Oil and Gas and the MD of BBP Law Incorporated. And we have Mr. Craig Morgall, a former member of Parliament, the CEO of ICAPA, the chairman of both SAOGA and the Energy and Digital Economy Focus Group. So 3 individuals with a lot of experience to share with us. Now, Anton, I'm going to start with my 2 market impact questions for you, and then we'll go through all the other questions. So, Anton, do you think the NERSA regulations of 2014 was the reason that we have the gas cliff? Do you think there's a direct link between the NERSA regulations of 2014 and the gas cliff?
Yeah, Wilmien, very quickly, there is a link, but it's not necessarily a direct link. I think there were other things that contributed as well. But, you know, it is a bit coincidental that between 2004 and 2014, the gas market in South Africa grew at a very fast rate. The moment in 2014, when the price regulations came in, the gas market stabilized. It didn't grow any further. And today, we know where we sit with the gas cliff. And I want to make some comments on the gas cliff, if you don't mind. But just to say, and it's not necessarily the pricing regulations that came in, the specific pricing. I think it's more the uncertainty that came with it. It was, you know, business do not like uncertainty. Business does not like to invest a lot of money on the back of uncertainty and not knowing where it's going. So since those pricing regulations came into effect, I think we've not been out of court yet for a single day. There's been challenges to the regulations. There's been decisions made. There's been changes that had to be made. I want to, if you don't mind, Wilmien, just comment on something that Craig said and then on something that Beresford said. We spoke about the job opportunity. We spoke about the 75,000 that the gas cliff could be put in jeopardy. It's actually worse than that, and for 2 reasons. You know, the 75,000 is the number that IGWASA puts on the table. So IGWASA speaks on behalf of their members, which are big industrial users. So I think at the moment there's about 25 members of IGWASA. And I think when we talk about the 75,000, it's those IGWASA members. But Sasol has direct industrial customers, smaller ones, another 500 customers, consuming only slightly less gas than IGWASA consumes. Now, typically I would expect small industry to provide a lot more jobs than big industry for the same amount of energy input. So I think one can safely say that there's probably at least double that amount of jobs at risk amongst the small industrial users, but they just do not have a voice. I'm not even sure to what extent they're aware of this train coming. The second thing I want to put on the table, which is also not discussed as far as the gas cliff is concerned, really, not in public at least, is the impact on the old Sasol 1 or the Sasol activities in Sasolburg. I mean, those activities will come to an end if there's no gas, because that is totally dependent on gas feedstock. We're talking at the close down of the total old Sasol 1 facility. Now, maybe not that much in terms of job opportunities, but in terms of the impact on the economy, it will be huge. I mean, it will lead to imports of ammonia, of fertilizer, of mining explosive. It will lead to imports of methanol. It will cancel exports of waxes. The impact will be big. So that in terms of the gas cliff, and if you don't mind, if I can just talk, and it's something that Beresford actually asked me when we were preparing for the webinar, and he touched on it again, and that is in terms of investment. He asked specifically, why is Sasol not investing in this? And of course, I think the reason, and it's a very good point to just think about for a second. Big companies like Sasol or Shell or Total, they make capital decisions. They decide where they can best spend the capital they've got available. Beresford had a look. What is Sasol's capital budget? So for this year, it is a bit lower than it was in the previous year, but we're still talking about a capital budget of 25 billion rand. They elect not to spend a lot of that in gas development in South Africa. And I think one of the reasons is they do not see as attractive a return on that capital as if they would have invested it in chemicals production in the United States or liquid fuels production in South Africa or wherever the other choices are. Of course, the 25 billion you have to be a bit careful of. A lot of it is renewable capital, which is just to keep the current operations going and to keep up to date with technology. But you can say at least 25% of that, I would think, would be capital for new projects, new business. And it's an election they make not to spend it. It's a bit similar to Shell losing interest in shale gas in South Africa and rather taking their money and go and invest it somewhere else. It's an economic decision. And that's the thing also, Craig, that it does play a role. Yes, there's the benefits to government of tax and royalties and all of that, but it must also be attractive for business. Otherwise, we're not going to go see this going too far. Sorry, Wilmina, I'm not sure I answered the question, but I just wanted to remark on some of the comments that was made in the webinar.
Yeah, Anton, this is good, and every time it helps us to look at it from a different viewpoint, and it's actually depressing if there's even more jobs and even more things to do. You know what I'm going to do? We are running out of time, but I think this is a good discussion, and the audience are very curious live to see. So sorry, colleagues, I haven't discussed it with you, but I'm not going to end the Q&A webinar at 11:30. Let's just have the speakers and answer all the questions. Participants, if you can't stay on, you are welcome to leave the webinar. We will post it on YouTube. But let's just keep this discussion going, because I think many of you who have spent the time to listen want to hear the rest of the discussion. So I'm just going to carry on longer, change my own plan a little bit. Sorry if I'm going to get into trouble with that, but I think it's so important. Craig, I see you wanted to comment on what Anton has commented on.
Yes, Wilmine. Wilmine, if you don't mind, I'd just like to share my screen quickly to show a map of South Africa in which I think some of the issues that Anton raised can be dealt with there. Let me just see here quickly.
Please do.
Share screen. Please let me know if my screen is...
I see myself on your screen.
Let me do this. There we go. Can you see the map now?
I see the map, yes.
Okay. So this is a map put together by Standard Bank, and we thank them for sharing this with us. It provides us with some good business intelligence, some market intelligence of the full value chain in Southern Africa, including the Orange Basin on the Namibian coastline. On the left-hand side, you'll see that there's a lot of activity in the Orange Basin and north of the Orange Basin. You'll see below that the Orange River mouth and the international border there. Below that, you'll see some more offshore exploration and production activity coming around the coast at Cape Town. You'll see more exploration offshore. You'll then see Brilpad and Leipherd below Mossel Bay with blocks 11B, 12B there. And then you'll see at several ports, there's the icon or symbol for a ship that represents LNG import terminals, where we anticipate there would be development. Of course, Richards Bay, the procurement process has already been concluded there. They are now moving as quickly as possible to financial close at the Zululand Energy Terminal there at Richards Bay. North of that is Matola, the Matola LNG Terminal, which will import LNG and then put it into the Ramco pipeline to deliver it to Sasolburg, Secunda, etc. And some of that gas will satisfy the requirements of industry there and gas to power as well. If one goes then south to Kuche, you'll see an FSRU there. We can expect some gas to power activity there. There's an existing gas to power facility called the DISA, owned by NG. The DISA peaker is presently running on diesel. It can potentially convert from diesel to gas-fired. Mossel Bay to the west along the coastline, we have an existing Eskom peaking power plant, also gas turbines, 740 odd megawatts there. That's also switching from diesel to gas. The Siemens equipment there, they've already switched out the burners so that it can then burn the gas as well, and is part of an Eskom gas supply tender that's out right now, live, for gas supply to Chorikwa. And then there's also gas supply to Eskom's gas turbines in Ankelig, in Atlantis, Cape Town, that is also part of that existing tender. If one then goes to the north, around Gauteng, you'll see several coal-fired power plants there. You'll see the 22 TCF in that grey area that crisscrosses, that the pipeline, the Lily pipeline crosses there in Gauteng. And then you obviously have industrial off-takers around several of these either existing or planned gas-to-power projects. And gas-to-power really serves as an anchor offtake so that you have a minimum volume that would be attractive enough to your gas suppliers. And we see that operations like Beresfords and Bastion, Canetico, Renogen, and others are giving serious consideration to liquefying the gas at the wellhead and transporting that gas on to off-takers, or using the gas in situ as close as possible to the gas well, to then establish a gas-to-power facility that you then, instead of transporting the gas molecules, you use the transmission network to transport the electrons. Mm. Basically where we are right now, Wilmien, and I hope that helped to add further color to Anton's market assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. You stopped sharing. And one of the questions was actually, can we see a map of the 22 TCF that you've talked about? And this is one of the maps. And as I said, some of our previous webinars also talk about that. So we can still see your screen. Thank you, Craig. Wow. Okay. Anton, another question for you. Can the NERSA regulations be improved? Craig, I still see myself on your screen. As I say. Can the
Okay.
NERSA regulations be improved to support gas supply development in South Africa? Is it possible?
Yeah, one must probably go back to when those regulations were drafted, Wilmien. I mean, it was done in a typical process, totally transparent. Everybody had the opportunity to participate. And maybe one should revisit that. You know, when those regulations were drafted 2012, 2013 in preparation for 2014, we sat with a situation where there was a monopoly, which is, I think, still the case. Sasol supplied all the gas, and we sit with an unlimited amount of gas available. I think today, situation has changed completely. We certainly have not got unlimited gas available. That is quite clear. And just for that reason alone, I think one can say safely that the regulation is probably not applicable today. Maybe we should go and revisit that and see what can we do from a NERSA perspective to try and attract investors into South Africa. You know, it's actually interesting, and maybe one can learn something from that. So Sasol had a 10-year moratorium from 2004 to 2014, which they received from government, where they could charge whatever price they wanted to for the gas to get a return on the capital which they invested. Maybe one must go back and say the same. If you bring in LNG via Richards Bay or Matola, you can, at least for a 10-year period, obviously on a willing buyer, willing seller basis, charge any price for that gas, just to give that certainty to the seller that he will have the ability to at least recover his capital. And that's just
when we talk about supply and demand, the demand is there. We just need the supply.
The demand is there at current price, and that is maybe the other point one must always make. The demand is price sensitive. So we have a certain demand, which is proven at more or less $7 per gigajoule of gas. If it's imported LNG, we're talking about a different price level, 12 to 14, I would guess, and the demand would not be as high. We've already spoken, for example, Sasolburg will still certainly close down. There's no doubt in my mind about that at 12 to 14 dollars per barrel. But most of the industrial customers would be able to survive. Interesting on that, I mean, I think the biggest opportunity for gas in South Africa is not the current sort of customer base we sit with. It is power generation. And that we have to give a lot more attention. How do we accommodate that?
Well, very good. Beresford, please pop in. Just switch on your camera for us. Thank you.
Yes, sorry. Let me drop my hand. Very interesting what you said, Anton. I think one of the things about oil and gas exploration companies is that they model everything. They model the investment decision. So they have a very astute understanding of what the pricing mechanisms are in the country. If they didn't, they would not be spending exploration money. And the very foundation of spending money on exploration is based on the fact that you're going to get a return, and that return is going to manage the risk. So the fact that you have a company like Kinetico, and I mean, obviously, we also see a return. That's why we're involved in exploration. Means that we recognize what the pricing is, more or less, of the gas coming down from Mozambique, what the potential is for imported LNG and the pricing mechanisms. And we feel that as an exploration company, we fit perfectly in the middle. The other thing is that what we also need to realize is, you know, as a gas production company, we have to, at least exploration right through to production, we recognize that there has been such a change in technologies. You know, can we as an exploration company bet on and Eskom being the purchaser of our gas and converting power stations, I think many would say that you're sitting with too much project on project risk to take that risk. We have technology improvements in terms of small scale LNG. So you're not looking at the kind of projects that would need to, for example, if you were looking at an offshore oil and gas project, the scale and size of that project has to be cost competitive, including the risk of doing it offshore and then the transportation, the pipelines onshore. But when you start looking at onshore gas, and the need is not a holistic need. For example, there may be a need in one municipality. You could effectively not have a big project, a modular development of a couple of gas wells, convert that gas into small-scale LNG, and send it directly through to a municipality who may or may not decide to build a gas-to-power facility. So it gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of where we can take our product with small-scale LNG. So our buyers are not necessarily, it's any consumer of energy. And once you fixed up the contracts, it becomes very easy to finance the infrastructure. So one would expect as an upstream exploration and production company that you will be significantly due diligenced, because for purposes of establishing certainty and for purposes of establishing the duration of those contracts. I thought that I'd just add that it becomes a lot easier, and as Craig mentioned in the beginning, a significant amount of our of establishment costs is South African rand. Not the same with offshore, where these facilities have to be built and constructed internationally. I don't think we have the skill and resource, although components can be done here, as we did with the upgrade of the glass tower in the Sable project. But the majority of the engineering and works are usually done overseas. So, and a lot of the kit that is required from overseas, and we need to be very careful within our regulatory environment. You know, all of these companies, particularly those offshore, are centered up in Aberdeen and centered in Galveston, centered in Singapore. And we need to be very careful of how we deal with the relationships with international companies, particularly companies will not deal with companies that are sanctioned. You understand? So we need to be very careful about the decisions we make and the equipment and facilities that we need, specifically for offshore. And it can be extremely challenging if that risk is perceived, which I think it is right now. I hope that added some more value.
And I'm going to ask Craig to comment. I know he had his hand up, but I just quickly want to say, and I love the word that Craig used was the corridors. And if you're in this corridor and that corridor, but if you're not in a corridor with pipeline, exactly what you say, Bastian, there's small scale LNG, and OTC did a whole webinar on small scale LNG if people are more interested. But that is technology that's been proven. It's out there. There are even more technologies being developed. It's possible to put your hands on gas to help you. But Craig, you wanted to comment on what Beresford said.
Yes. The point that Beresford made and Anton made earlier about gas to power as anchor offtake. And you certainly have procurement opportunities for gas to power, as I mentioned, that are underway. One of them is the gas to power program being run by the IPP office to procure 2,000 megawatts of gas to power. Right. You also have a municipality, to touch on Beresford's point earlier, a municipality, eThekwini, Durban, procuring 400 megawatts of IPP power, of which 300 megawatts will be gas to power. right? So there's an example of a municipality that's directly procuring gas to power. Eskom also has ambition to procure 3,000 gigawatts of gas to power. And then there are several opportunities for gas to power under private PPA agreements with energy intensive users who feel that they do not want to rely on Eskom or an intermittent renewable energy resource perhaps. And so we find this certainly from my company's perspective, Ikapa Energy's perspective, that we are beginning to engage more and more with energy intensive users who want to consider gas in their behind the meter embedded generation kind of energy mix, because they're beginning to realize that although solar may have value during the day, it doesn't operate at night. And to then give them 24/7 operations, if they wanted to avoid any fossil fuel, they would then need to use battery energy storage. And unfortunately, the capex for that is not price competitive. So then you're left with gas to power, right? And you can have all of these technologies in a hybrid project behind the meter for such an energy intensive user. Or you could have it located elsewhere and then wheel it across the network to such energy intensive users. And these opportunities are opening up. As I mentioned in my introduction, the Electricity Regulation Act was amended, in particular Schedule 2, to allow for private PPA offtake. We've seen now that there's also been the emergence of electricity traders who must be licensed with NERSA. Eskom has challenged this because they are saying, although they're not against the participation of electricity traders, such trading cannot take place without market rules being clearly defined and adopted. And so we have the emergence of a market mechanism, the wholesale electricity market, being defined and developed. We also have the retail electricity market that will come. But what we have not established yet is a gas market with a gas aggregator would balance supply and demand and also look at the then pricing based on supply and demand. Scarcity is a key driver. So we see this new phase of development with the necessary regulatory certainty that we are in the process as industry via various organizations. We are fighting for that certainty. We are regularly engaging with government. For Upstream, we've engaged with PASA in the PASA journey workshops. We recently completed workshop 3, which has defined the industry's position on several issues, but also how then to engage with government in a formal structure where, to be frank with you, we are then able to say to government across the table, this is what we need, and they will have an opportunity to respond to say, yes, we can satisfy that need, or no, we can't. And where government can't, well, then the market will need to find solutions to balance supply and demand in its own way, right? And so we're seeing a lot of the creative thinking coming out on how to avoid any red tape, but we also see the state wanting to participate, given their mandate, and most of their mandates are underfunded. So unfortunately for many of the state-owned companies, their ambition is greater than their resources, and that therefore is the reality check that they face. And we want to work with them, but within reason, without undermining the investability of these projects. Thanks, Wilming.
Oh, Craig, it opens, but I'll leave my very difficult question for the end. I see there's such good questions coming up that I want to give priority for. One of the questions I wanted tongue in the cheek to throw out there was to say, the solution is just to put sun panels. Let's just all put sun panels everywhere and it will solve the problem. And I wanted your feedback, but you already answered that to say, yeah, but what if the sun is not shining and then you need this big battery? We have in one of our webinars talked about very new innovative batteries coming up that we can use, but it just makes the capital expenditure so much more. So we can't solve one problem by creating another one. That theme comes through the whole time. So Craig, I'm going to ask you the next question. What can we as energy consultants or small gas users do to accelerate the gas development projects in Southern Africa? So do you have some wisdom to share with us on that? How can we, as consultants or small gas users, what can we do to accelerate the development projects in our country?
Well, I think one has to start off with your demand profile. You know, you have an off-taker or you have a gas center. Typically, it could be an industrial area. And if you look at that gas demand center, what potential there is to switch from an existing legacy energy appliance that might be using a dirtier fossil fuel like heavy fuel oil, diesel, or coal. And let's say your main driver is to avoid the carbon tax. Well, gas gives you a means of reducing your carbon emissions and therefore saving on the carbon tax. In many instances, gas, including small-scale LNG, will be cheaper than diesel, so it makes it a very easy choice in terms of purely your cost structure and your operating expenditure to then switch from more expensive diesel to cheaper gas. And if we take it that this then creates a market that needs molecules, then you need to then de-risk your project. Let's say your off-taker says, yes, I've decided to go for gas. I will make the investment in retrofitting my existing energy account so that it can consume gas. And so they undertake a project, a retrofit project, to be gas ready. At the same time, you need to then have your gas supply being developed. And it needs to be de-risked. So what do we then generally do? Well, in the project development phase, we hire consultants, engineers, to help us do the engineering design of the gas supply solution. We hire the services of environmental assessment practitioners because all of this requires environmental impact assessments, and therefore it's very important that NEMA be fixed, or else this can't happen easily. And then last but not least, we then do the financial modeling based on the technical design. And we then go to investors to say, this is the tariff at which we want to supply the molecules or the electrons. Would you invest in this, assuming that our financial modeling is adequately accurate based on an adequately detailed engineering design? We are then able to put such projects through a feasibility study that would de-risk those projects, so that preliminary agreements that might be conditioned on a particular milestone being achieved, what Beresford referred to as conditions precedent, those are in your initial, interim, or preliminary set of agreements, on which basis you then start your feasibility study and project preparation to ultimately de-risk the project. Once you get to financial close or bankable feasibility, that is when the investor says, okay, you've removed all of the conditions precedent that I have put as requirements before I can make this investment. You have satisfied all of them. We are now willing to sign the definitive agreements at financial close. And from there, proceed to construction, commercial operations, subsequent to your commissioning of such facilities. I hope that helps to identify the process. The stakeholders, we can get to at another slide, but we've highlighted many of them already. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're going to have like 20 webinars to try to cover all of that. But what I heard is the one thing, Craig is saying, become more demanding. The more we demand, we increase the overall demand. the more pressure we put on the system to get going. But the second thing I'm hearing very clearly, and in our prep we've talked about that as well, we need to de-risk our projects. And Beresford and Craig made it so clear to me to say, well, we need to do in our projects, we need to do an excellent EIA. You know what's required for the EIA. You know what's required for all the other things. Do that properly. Don't do it halfway, because your project might suffer. But if 5, 6, 7 of those projects in South Africa suffer, there's a cumulative effect for investors to think we are a little bit risky in our country. And I do think we need to go back to excellence in all we do. I know it was one of the previous values, and a value means nothing if we don't do that. But we need to, there's certain things that we can't get away with, and that is one of the things we can't get away with. So let us as consultants, as small projects, just get the right people in. OTC has consultants to help people make sure these are the things that you need to do. Let's do it properly. Craig, yes, you can comment on that. I wasn't sure if Beresford and Anton also wanted to comment on that. So guys, you can just keep your cameras on the whole time, unless there's doggies or stuff that you need to take care of. But let's carry on. Yes, Craig, you wanted to say.
Wilmien, you mentioned a very important word, but in a different context. You used the word cumulative impacts, cumulative effects. I think when we attempt to fix NEMA, in particular Section 43, we must distinguish between potentially urgent environmental impacts in situ around a well, for example, or around a gas to power facility or around a pipeline. We need to distinguish between what is urgent and what is cumulative impact. Right? So let's take greenhouse gas emissions as an example. Greenhouse gas emissions is defined in our nationally determined commitments as a total national greenhouse gas emissions budget, a carbon budget. The Climate Change Act, which came into effect recently, now allocates a carbon budget to each sector, including the energy sector, and the oil and gas sector will have its allocation, and it will need to comply with that or face carbon taxes. Right? And when we see the use of Section 43 by the green NGOs that litigate, they often cite the environmental impact, but without making a distinction between urgent kind of in situ impacts, and they conflate that with cumulative impacts. The new fixed NEMA must say on which basis an immediate appeal might be granted, because there might very well be an urgent environmental impact that needs to be dealt with immediately. But that assumes that we are talking about an operation that is underway, not in the planning stage, not at an environmental impact assessment stage. And every applicant for an environmental authorization, whether it be a solar, wind, or gas project, it doesn't matter, goes through a public participation process where they lay out their plans to the public in a public meeting, and the public has the opportunity to ask certain questions about potential environmental risk. The developers then respond there formally in writing, and it is documented by the environmental assessment practitioner. Now, if the risks that have been identified are adequately mitigated by the responses during the public participation process, why are the same issues then raised in litigation? You understand what I'm saying? You've had a bite of the public participation process. If the public, if that community feels they want the project, and that despite their own concerns about the environment, they rate the job opportunities higher than the cumulative impact of greenhouse gases further down the line, they are wanting the jobs first, right? And this is our feedback from engaging with communities as industry association, as individual project developers. People are desperate for jobs. Now, the Presidential Climate Commission commissioned a survey recently that was conducted by the Human Sciences Research Council that discovered, and I don't know if this came as a surprise, but they discovered that the majority of adults in South Africa deem job creation and socioeconomic benefits to be of higher priority than climate change. They're not saying about the climate. They're not saying about. They're saying it enjoys a higher priority. And our energy modeling, whether it be the IEP, the IRP, for electricity, the gas master plan, takes all of these competing imperatives, energy security, job creation, environmental sustainability, affordability, all of that into account already. So when we talk about cumulative effects, the NDC already covers cumulative effects. The IRP takes that into account in the modeling. The gas master plan, although in draft form right now, also takes the nationally determined commitments into account. So cumulative effects, we are covered by the regulatory framework. Such an impact that I mean, you can only assess an impact of an urgent nature once you are operating, not when you're planning a project. You know,
yeah, fair enough. I don't want to go through all these things, putting all the effort in my project, have this public participation, get all the things, address all the issues, get the go-ahead, spend a year to 2 years on an environmental impact assessment, just then to be stopped by someone who didn't participate and give me something that I couldn't address, and all that time is lost. So that is a frustration. And what I'm hearing from Craig as well is many people in South Africa say, I want to eat now. I want to feed my children now. Yes, I know the CO2 can impact future generations, and I know that is important, but how can I put future generations' priority higher than feeding my children now? And that is very much a developmental country problem. And South Africa is still a development country. We are not on the forefront. We have people who are poor, people who want food. Beresford, we don't even get to some of the other good questions, but what did you want to add to what Craig has said?
No, I think we you know, with regard to Craig, what Craig said about risk assessment and what is taking place in South Africa, and it's very difficult. Remember that every oil and gas company effectively somewhere has an investment decision committee, whether that just be a few or the bigger companies have bigger. And they sit down and they do these analysis, and they've got a certain quantum of money that they want to invest. And they sit with choices. Do we go to South Africa? Do we go to Namibia? Do we invest somewhere else? Do we stay in our country? And they usually do, you know, what we call EMV, expected monetary value risk assessments. And the moment you add the complexity of litigation into the equation, like we have in South Africa, automatically that project is not going to happen no matter what the return is, because you can't model litigation. It's extremely difficult to do that. And we have to acknowledge something in South Africa, and that is we have a lot of challenges in our court system at the moment. A potential skills deficit with the sophistication of oil and gas projects, which we need to look at and address, but also the amount of time it takes for matters to progress from the High Court. To get a matter on the roll, if you are applying for a date, is extremely difficult, and a lot of these issues cannot simply be addressed as urgent issues to get them on the roll very quickly. So we need to be very sensitive. Do we have a good judicial system? My opinion is yes. The problem is, how effective is it at resolving issues? That's a different point. And as we've said before, the green lobby have recognized that there's potential between, for example, being part of the process, not satisfied with the outcome. Often I think you could never have satisfied them from the very beginning, because their objective is to reduce fossil fuel use. And now the matter goes, the company has spent a fortune on to get to the environmental authorization process. We get there, they challenge it via an appeal. If they are not satisfied with the outcome of the appeal, it's automatically a review process, and we get stuck in litigation over which they've have a significant degree of control over the future of the project. And that control, in relation to what Craig mentioned earlier, you may very well sit with a community that sees the benefit of these projects in the creation of jobs, but you're stuck in a litigation framework. So we need to be very careful in the way we draft our legislation, and we look at the regulatory environment, particularly how we deal with appeals in terms of NEMA at the moment. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I have a question for Craig, and maybe the other participants can ask as well. For a long time in my life, I've assumed that just leave government, it will take long, let us accept it. Policies and procedures and things cannot change quickly. There's things that we need to have in place. But then COVID came. And then things happened very, very quickly. So in my mind, my logic says it is possible. It is possible if we care enough of the lives of people. It is possible if the pressure and the demands are there. Is it possible to get things happening quicker within the procedures that we are talking about? Craig, I first want to hear from you, and then I want to hear of the others. Either tell me I'm wrong and help me, or let's challenge people out there to say, can we do another COVID that will have such a beautiful impact on South Africa?
Yeah, Wilmien, it is a difficult question, and I'm going to be as diplomatic as I could possibly be in my response. Can I say to you that my assessment, having engaged with colleagues in the industry over many, many years, is that they love this country. They are patriotic about this country. You heard Beresford say earlier that he has had opportunities to work everywhere else in Africa and elsewhere in the world, but he has chosen to spend his time here in his home country. There are others that are as frustrated, perhaps even more frustrated than Beresford and I may be, or OTC may be, because we see the opportunity. And what frustrates us is that we're not getting to realize that opportunity quickly enough. Right? We see how urgent and desperate the needs of people are out there. We see poverty, we see the unemployment numbers, we see systems not working, we're seeing the need for infrastructure, and the challenge is, I believe, a function of several factors. But the key one I want to focus on today is the lack of collaboration. Right? You asked me to give you a one-word answer earlier, and I said collaboration. And I think if one accepts that the intentions are good, that we could then all face in the same direction, we could get our ducks in a row. How do we do that? We do that in an appropriate forum. What is that appropriate forum right now for Upstream? As I mentioned earlier, we're engaged with government through the PASA Journey Workshop, in which private sector and public sector participate. So you have in that upstream focused forum, we have government and industry engaging with each other there and have come to certain, call it consensus position, where we've said on both sides, government and business, these are challenges that we need to address urgently, have agreed on that, what those challenges are, and now need to implement those decisions. What is frustrating then is that where we may have had consensus on a particular issue, such as NEMA, we haven't moved quickly enough to address that. Right? So it becomes frustrating. It is not only frustrating for us as South Africans, but also for the foreign partners that we have that want to invest in these projects, but without the red tape.
Yes.
And then they look at us as the South African partners to say, why are you not talking to your government? Why are they dragging their feet on, solution X or solution Y? And we engage with government and share this with them. Sometimes we feel ignored. It's not a pleasure to feel ignored, especially when you have something that can generate revenue for this country to meet its social needs. Right? This is not importing everything. This is saying we have a natural endowment here, oil and gas, that we can utilize the benefit of the people of this country. Yes, there are business people that will, enjoy dividends from their business being successful. But we mustn't forget the very taxes that Beresford spoke about earlier fill the coffers of a government. Look at the GDP growth in Guyana alone. Double-digit growth year on year since they started producing oil and gas in Guyana. We see the opportunity increasing and the activity increasing in Namibia right now. You saw the picture that I showed you earlier on the map.
Yeah.
And the activity in the Namibian part of the Orange Basin, but we don't see as much activity in the South African part of the Orange Basin. That picture tells 1,000 tales, and most of those tales are tragedies. Right? It's a tragedy that we are not where we should have been 15 years ago, had we not started creating regulatory uncertainty, number one, because we attracted investment, as Beresford mentioned earlier. That investment, as Anton has indicated earlier, after 2014, it kind of plateaued. There was no further additional projects. We ascribe that to regulatory uncertainty, nothing else. Our country is known. Beresford has got one of the greatest geologists this country has ever seen on his team. The others, Renogen, D3, Rhino, they've got excellent geologists. There's a process that Beresford can describe in more detail, how you move from prospective and contingent resources to reserves. The reserves are confirmed and certified by an independent third party, not the promoter of the project themselves. They can say whatever they like. You don't know until it is independently verified by a third party. And that, right? In many cases, the reserve reports are there. So there is no doubt, once you have a reserve report, how much gas you have that is potentially commercially viable. And if we move from there, then we need to really say, where are those blockages? Is it in the licensing of the blocks, moving from a TCP to an exploration right, from an exploration right to a production right? How quickly are we moving with those administrative processes? And Beresford can tell you, as can many others, that it is extraordinarily long. They are processing these applications as if there is no crisis, whilst there is a crisis. There is a gas, and it is a crisis. It's not a crisis waiting to happen. It is a crisis that's happening because if we think back to load shedding, load shedding happened in 2008 after more than 10 years of underinvestment, under-planning, and under-execution. We're at the stage now where we have plans, but we need to sort out our execution approach, which means that the various stakeholders need to work together to develop a project schedule in which their particular activities are aligned in that project schedule with those of the private sector. And what we have right now, just as an example, is Eskom releasing a gas supply tender. And although it meets with TNPA on a regular basis, Eskom released their tender without TNPA, then simultaneously releasing the tender for the gas supply infrastructure at the ports so that Eskom can receive the gas that it's procuring.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah,
what are they talking about in those monthly meetings? That's what I would like to know.
Yeah, wow. And I mean, you said to collaborate, and for me, I can collaborate a lot, but do I collaborate at the right place? And you've said, okay, PSA is a forum available, open to everyone. Let's collaborate there and get the ball rolling. I will let the others comment as well, but let's first handle all these questions. Next question, I think I'm going to ask to Beresford. Why are large companies who've been impacted by the legislation take the government to court about, and why don't large companies who've been impacted don't go to court?
It's a good question, and one has to think about this. Large companies have worldwide options. You have to remember that. A company that is looking at an exploration project in Namibia and possibly South Africa, they've got production operations running in other parts of the world. You don't appreciate. I mean, the numbers that we talk are extremely large, but and the budgets of these companies are extremely large. And it's not the policy of big companies to litigate against government. It's just not. They would rather bow out quietly and move their operations to another country. I've seen this often, I think one has to be, if one looks at the number of companies who have operated in Africa, you will see that the moment there's a confrontational situation with regard to government, they either are able to solve that problem, and if they're unable to solve that problem, they generally buy out. I mean, I'd like to know why Total left the blocks in South Africa and focused the attention. I think they were closer to a production right application, and they had gas in the gas that had been discovered. Yet they left. They moved out of that block. They focused on another block in South Africa, but that is still in the very early exploration phase, which requires a significantly less investment than into a production operation, which was required on the East Coast. So they bowed out very politely. There's your answer lies there. For us, however, and that's why I'm here in the seminar. I'm a South African, and Bastion is a South African company. We don't have the luxury of simply losing the investment that our shareholders have made into getting the company here. We have to fight. You understand? And the Craig talks about collaboration. I find it very interesting that a company like Bastion, a local South African company with all the expertise, takes such a long time to get granted its exploration rights. I think there is definitely not sufficient collaboration. I think we need to the right, incentivize every single cent that's invested, incentivize exploration, make things easier, because we have an energy crisis in our country. I struggle to understand some of the decisions that have been made. They are really challenging, but let's hope that whereas other companies may leave, I don't have that luxury at all. I have to stay here in our country. We've made our bed, so we have to fight for change.
Yeah, let's do that. And Anton, you have a lot of experience in corporate and in countries in these things. So what is your opinion about why does the large companies not just take the government to court?
Yeah, I think Beresford answered that very well in terms of the international companies. They just go where they think their investments would be better treated. But the local companies, to a large extent, has not got, they do not have a choice, as Beresford says, from an exploration perspective. But I thought the question also touched on the NERSA side, on the gas regulatory prices. And
there's one for LNG and pipeline gas pricing. Yes, yeah. There's a question on that too.
In that case, the big companies did take the government to court. They did take NERSA to court. This is what I referred to earlier. And that sat in court for at least 5 years till there was, I don't know, 3 or 4 appeals processes. And finally, it was actually ruled in favor of the large companies. So they do, because they have got no choice in that case, because they're fighting for their survival. You know, some of those big companies, those big gas consumers, their prices in 2014 trebled because of regulation. So one must understand why they did it as well. They were fighting to survive, and some of them actually did not survive. I think it's these things are never that you can put a specific your finger on it, say that was the reason. But I think what's happening to AMSA in Newcastle is to some extent because of gas pricing. The cost of energy just became too high. And we're seeing that with other things which are not necessarily directly gas related. All the smelters, the chrome smelters that are closing down, the manganese smelters that are not getting going, the aluminium smelters which probably will have to leave. It's all energy cost related.
Yeah. And Barry said, I see you want to ask something as well. And I can just imagine the cost of employing lawyers to go to court over a year and how long that takes must be incredible. And I can also imagine you want to fight the right battle. You still want relationship with government to get your project pushed through and to choose which of the many battles to fight. I can imagine it's difficult. But Beresford, add
that is very... Anton, you are spot on. And litigation is very expensive. And you need to be very careful. You know, you can have a very, very strong case and be successful in that case. But at the end of the day, if you litigate against government, they still are your regulator at the end of the day. You still want to tell them they're bad, sort it out, and then you want to have a working relationship with them, you know. But once you start getting lawyers involved and start litigating, then, you know, all common courtesy and all common decency tends to go out of the window. It becomes ad hominem, and it really creates a challenging environment. If you may need you've challenged, you've been successful, and now you need an approval, a consent, or even a transfer or an extension. As many of our projects, as the market moves, sometimes the target project date has to move, and then you have to go back to the very regulator that you've taken to court. It's very difficult, and that's why we really need good people who are able to distinguish between whether this is a fight that we can resolve between ourselves or whether it's something that we can move forward because it's in the best interests of our country. and not necessarily in the best interests of everyone. So I think I think it's also a function of our young democracy also, that we need to learn to get on with one another. I think many of us will say that the government of national unity is really I don't really want to go, but it illustrates the point that it takes time and effort to get to a point of working together and finding out what is common and in everybody's interest that we can agree on and work together. And then those things that are on the far left and the far right that we can't agree on, but in the interest, let's work together on those that we agree, without it becoming personal or petty. I don't know. I mean, Anton, there is one thing I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind. I have a question, and that is, with regard to these smelters, and it's something I've never sat down and considered. Have they themselves looked at the potential of companies like Kinetico and Bastion and D3, who are potential gas suppliers, to get themselves out of the situation? Because, I mean, are they aware of aware of where we are as oil and gas explorers in South Africa? Do they need to be given more information, or are they just plain negative?
Or too little, too late, Anton. And I see Craig also. I want to hear from Craig too, but let's quickly hear from Anton.
I know it's a difficult question, but it's something that occurred to me.
Yes, it's a good question, and I don't think there's an easy answer, and one will have to sit down and explore that properly. But it's something we've spoken before on some of these webinars, and it's what I call what is the affordability of gas. Now, different applications have got different affordabilities. We, for example, know, and you said it yourself, if you want to convert this gas into chemicals, you can only afford $3, $4, or $5 per gigajoule. Anything more than that, it's not affordable. And that's where Sasol is sitting. On the other end of the scale, if you're going to replace a diesel or LPG, then of course the price of the gas can be $20 a gigajoule, and it's affordable for such a customer to do that. Electricity, which is what the smelters are using today to a large extent, is sitting somewhere in the middle. But I do not think up to now, converting electricity or converting gas to electricity in South Africa has not been economical. But as Eskom prices have increased, I think we're getting to that point where it's getting very close. And at some stage, Beresford, we can sit working through. We've got certain opinions about that, but we still think if you want to generate base power out of gas, you would and compete with Eskom, you probably cannot afford a gas price higher than we say $6 to $10 per gigajoule. That is the sort of range. If there's other cases where you would be able to afford more, for let's say peaking power, or where it's supplemental to renewable power. So if you, and one of the two of you mentioned it, if you run it just to supplement your solar, then you can afford a little bit more for the gas. But it's not an easy answer, but you're 100% spot on. That is the way one has to think about it.
I think also that sorry.
Okay, quickly finish, and then we go to Craig.
I also think that some of the gas recipients and customers, they also need to do their own investigations and have conversations with the explorers as to where they are in this value chain process. Yes. I say that from experience because, we have the Ramco pipeline flowing through one of our blocks, and strangely enough, no one wants to ask the question or have a conversation about it. And what I'm hoping that out of the seminar, I think, or out of this webinar, that it will alert companies' interest to what's really happening on the ground in South Africa, and stimulate conversations with companies like Kinetico, D3, and these guys can look at some form of self-help.
Let's see. Craig, you've been very patient waiting to have your say. What do you want to say?
Yeah, so Wilmien, these challenges that we've identified and highlighted today, when we discuss this in an appropriate forum, firstly, where is that appropriate forum? Well, firstly, we want to encourage people to join the Oil and Gas Industry Association. We are with SAOGA, but there are other industry associations, including PASA for onshore gas, PASA for offshore gas. We also have IGWASA focusing on their members and their interests, but also the wider needs. We have FIASA, the old SA Petroleum Industry Association is now called FIASA, Fuels Industry Association South Africa, and of course SAOGA, that has been around since 2003, covering mainly...
That's a lot.
Yes, yes. So firstly, those voices have been aligned as much as possible. About 4 years ago, we started engaging the other industry associations to say, guys, what can we do together and to defragment the voice of the oil and gas industry. In the early part of this year, we all attended a national gas symposium that concluded with the support for developing a national gas compact in which we could all align as industry associations with the public sector, besides academia and others. That initiative is not off the ground yet, right? But we hope that that initiative will unify the voice of industry associations under an umbrella structure that would be a single voice. Okay? We see the positive impact of having such a single voice, engaging with government through the National Energy Crisis Committee, where business, government have sat in the NECOM structures, including various working groups and task teams, where industry and government players sit down and say, okay, what is the problem? How do we solve it? What are the resources required? And by when can we do this? It's essentially what they asked for. In that way, they've been able to deal with load shedding successfully. And I believe we can deal with the gas cliff successfully in this way as well. The forum is in the process of being established. There is an existing forum within NEDLAC, but NEDLAC has been, for all intents and purposes, a cumbersome, lengthy social compacting process. Whereas what we need here now is to align on the execution approach.
Yes,
we've got policy.
Absolutely.
See, we've got the gas master plan coming up, but do we have an execution approach on a corridor for corridor basis where we can balance supply and demand? And the answer is no, not. And that for me is the next step. And when one looks at that organogram, that business process map that I showed you earlier, you'll see it says under policy, whatever policy challenges we have, we need to resolve them by engaging with people in charge of policy, and that's government. In terms of master planning, government and industry have engaged on the gas master plan, the IRP, the transmission development plan, but we don't have enough engagement around the port development plans, the pipeline development plans that includes both government and industry in such a forum to develop the execution plans for the supporting infrastructure. Right? We heard Beresford talk about a pipeline that runs through the Bastion acreage and other rights holders as well. Who is planning the appropriate interconnection with those pipelines? It's not clear, right? You can say, well, it's Transnet pipelines for Lily. You can say Ramco has an existing company structure. But the engagement around that seems to be done in the dark by people with their own commercial interests that don't necessarily align with the national interest. And therefore, we need to forge consensus in such a forum. And all of your participants, all of your viewers with an interest needs to identify where in the value chain they could add value, bring their ideas, because we're not claiming that we know it all. We are not saying that we represent everyone. But in a forum that is open and inclusive, everyone would have an opportunity to come and put their solutions on the table for the challenges that they and others have identified. Thanks, Wilming.
Wow, well, thank you, Craig. And I want to finish off with this very strong comment that one of the participants put in our chat box. He said, if there was political will, it would be easy to do gas. Right now, it seems that government is passively complicit in the hurdles we face, the opinion from this person. Government is complicit in the hurdles we face, whether intentional or not. This is something that requires intervention at a very high level, at a level to change legislation. How does one even start to do that when individual ballot votes are irrelevant? So I hear the frustration, and I feel the frustration, and I feel my eyes have been opened, my ears have been opened, and now my hands just want to jump in and do. And that is what I hear as well. Now it's a time to jump in and do. Now it's a time, as Craig said, to execute. I'm going to give each of one of you 1 minute for your final thoughts, and then we will finish. Anton, can we start with your final thoughts, please?
Yeah, well, maybe touching on, and Craig has said it in a very nice way, and that is we have to find a way to collaborate between business, and let me put a business hat on, and government. The only way you collaborate effectively is you have to have trust between the parties. And I think we sit in a situation right now from both sides where that trust is at a very low level. I mean, you've touched on it, Beresford has touched on it, in that from a business side, we feel very uncomfortable. We're not sure that government is acting in the interest of business. And the other way around, and that Craig said in a very nice way, of course, business is business and they will pursue their own commercial interests. Now, how do you bridge that? How do you build that trust? How do we get to that point where we can collaborate effectively? And that trust building is underlying it.
Very true, very true. Thank you, Anton. Beresford.
Thank you very much. I think from my side, putting the regulatory hat on, I think we've raised the issues that we really need to deal with as a upstream, downstream, and midstream industry, and that is address NEMA and find a path forward so that projects can move forward and not overly burdened. But also being environmentally sensitive. I mean, I'm an environmentalist, but I still see the problems that we have. Then we need to think very carefully about our regulatory environment. Is it in the best interest of our country right now that we move forward with the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Act regulations and more amendments to more legislation in the hope of achieving regulatory certainty when we in fact have it already? Should we not just stop this process? And if there's amendments, it's not perfect. The MPRDA is not perfect, but we can fix it up piece by piece. But at least we have regulatory certainty that exists under the current legislative environment. And the last point is we need to stop making mistakes and scoring own goals. You know, we need to get, I feel as though we still need to get to the bottom of the barrel. It's time for us to start making positive steps forward, because that's the only way we can build trust And that's the only way that we can eventually get our economy to grow. And there's no better feedstock for growing your economy than oil and gas exploration and oil and gas production, and for the provision of jobs as a multiplier factor. Thank you very much.
And what I love about that, when you said scoring goals, there's nothing that unites the country together, like Bafana Bafana winning a game, or like the Bokke winning a game. And you can only get that when you work together as a team, which brings me back to what Craig said about collaboration. And if, as Anton said, if the team members trust each other, if I want to pass the ball to you and I can't trust that you're going to catch it or to kick the ball, it's very difficult to win the game. And we want to win this game. That is what I'm very sure of. Craig, your last words.
Yeah, I would agree with the comments made earlier by Anton and alluded to by Beresford as well, that there is a significant trust deficit between the public sector and the private sector at present, not only within the energy sector, I might add. This, I believe, is motivated by two almost opposing worldviews. The private sector is driven by primarily shareholder value, but the private sector, and especially responsible corporate citizens, have extended their objectives to beyond satisfying the wants and needs of their shareholders, but the broader stakeholders in society. And you cannot fund social welfare programs unless you have the money for it. Right? To have the money for it, you need business to generate revenue, pay its taxes, so that the money goes into the tax base and can be spent on infrastructure and the social welfare requirements of the people of our country. How do we deal with the trust deficit? Well, what do we not trust each other on? There's some very basic things. There are prescribed processes that one finds in the legal and regulatory framework that one would assume has a prescribed or at least a target time frame attached to processing certain regulatory consents and approvals, including permits and rights and licenses, all of the things that government regulates. If we could only start dealing with those more efficiently, right, then we would reduce the trust deficit, at least from the private sector side, that government would administer the legal and regulatory framework efficiently. But there is also a trust deficit that we completely understand that government has towards the private, based on its worldview. And that worldview is that markets have proven themselves not to have a social conscience. Markets and the private sector, in the eyes of government, is focused on profits and shareholder value and not stakeholder value adequately. And that is why when you speak to government officials, speak to politicians, they say to you, how does this serve the national interest? What they're asking essentially is not only how will you as a business benefit, but how would the people then benefit as well? And not only through the tax base, but through the supply chain as well. And if the private sector then does not show how it could contribute to the greater good, government then sees the role for the state to intervene and regulate. And this can be the only legitimate reason for government to get involved. Government should not get involved where a politician or an official or a state-owned company executive acts in their personal interest in a corrupt manner to secure opportunities for themselves and not in the national interest either. So where you have these imperatives of business wanting efficient processing of regulatory instruments, you also have government wanting to see business do more, but we have also seen the government has inserted itself in many instances where it doesn't really need to, and it regulates something not because it has to be regulated, but to make government relevant and insert government into value chains where it might not need to really participate. That then creates opportunities for corrupt people within government. And let me say this, not everyone in government is corrupt. There are some very, very good people who are patriotic and committed to efficient public service. I've met them, I know them. But there are also those who, from the Zondo Commission we've learned, from the latest revelations by General Mkhwanazi and others, corruption is real. And it really muddies the waters when you are not sure when a decision is taken that is being taken in the national interest or to serve a particular individual or group of individuals who want to abuse the system for their personal gain. From the private sector, you are faced then with not only the daunting task of complying with legislation, but you then also have to deal with corruption in the system. And that you cannot deal with in an open forum where government and business sit to plan an execution approach, and you say, and you make a proposal that is logical, that makes sense, and then that logic is undermined by a decision that is illogical. Yes. And you are left with only one conclusion, that this illogical decision is made for nefarious, corrupt reason. That is where the trust deficit comes from. And I felt the need to expand on what Anton referred to earlier, so that we can be very clear what we mean by a trust deficit. It is both ways.
Yeah.
It works both ways.
Very true. Yeah. We're going to carry on for the rest of the day. Very, very true. Someone has now mentioned that if we are a team and we want to win, we need a coach. So let's get a coach to run through. And I do hope that the right forums will have the right coaches to drive this process forward. And let's start to trust each other in the small things. Because if we trust each other in the small things, we can trust each other in the big things. And the small things are often, when I say I'm going to do something, let me do it. I will trust you if you promise me it will take a week, and within a week you are coming back to me. But I'll also trust you when you say I care about people, that we are actually caring about people. And as we say, there are a lot of good people in government, and there are a lot of good people in the private sector that really care and that want to involve in the social economic things. Gentlemen, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm asking for the whole audience out there, let's take the idea of what a gentleman is out there. Let's be mature. Let's treat each other with respect. Let's listen to each other, and let us act in a trustworthy way to make this company work. Because if every one of us going to benefit by this, more people are going to earn money, more people can pay taxes, more of the taxes can be used into the social development activities in this country. We can win this war, but let us do it in the right way. Thank you very much. The end.